And joining me now is Peter Navarro. He's the Director of Trade and Manufacturing Policy inside the White House, but in this crisis, he's also the National Defense Production Act Policy Coordinator. Mr. Navarro, welcome back to Meet the Press. And I want to start with your current job as Defense Production Act Coordinator. I'm sure you've seen the letter a handful of Democratic senators have written, and they're frustrated that it hasn't been invoked enough. They say that the authority has been used too sparingly to basically even out the market when it comes to PPE and testing kits and testing supplies. What do you say to their concerns?
They're dead wrong. Let me give you a couple of examples. One of the most successful uses of the Defense Production Act was to get General Motors working with a small company called Ventec to make ventilators. We had a serious crisis back at the time. This was a miracle and in some sense a microcosm, Chuck, for the future. What we had was General Motors in 17 days working with this small company stood up a ventilator factory, and within 3 days with the help of UPS we were able to deliver ventilators to hospitals in Gary and Chicago. Now, beneath the surface of that, using the DPA, the real story is GM went in and used 3D imaging to replicate a factory in Seattle. It was small. It was only cranking out 25 ventilators. More importantly, Chuck, 700 pieces go into that ventilator, and GM was able to use its manufacturing platform to go out to its supply chain to replicate virtually all of those here on domestic soil. So using the DPA, we were able to move in incredible speed, innovative, and bring ventilator production right here to domestic soil. That, for me, is a microcosm of what we're doing. Honeywell, we opened 2 factories, one in Arizona and one in Rhode Island. That was done using the DPA in 5 weeks as opposed to 9 months. So we're using the DPA whenever we need to, and we're using it quite effectively.
Well, you're making a strong case for how the DPA can be effective. And what these senators are asking is use it more to ramp up the issue, for instance, the issue of testing kits, but more importantly, the supplies it takes to process those tests is still something we lag behind on. What's wrong with using DPA to surge those supplies?
These senators are looking in the rearview mirror. We had the same discussion 6 weeks ago about ventilators. They were saying the exact same thing. And what we did with ventilators was basically get a situation now where by June we're going to have over 100,000 of them. We're going to have more ventilators than America ever needs. And we're going to be able to export those ventilators, make that an export industry, jobs here, exports there. And we're going to be able to give ventilators to our allies that can't afford them. So same thing's happening with testing as we speak. Every week it ramps up. It's kind of like computer chips where the speed doubles every certain amount. Same things happen with testing. So these Democratic senators ought to get out more often and see what the Trump administration is doing. Chuck, the essence of this administration, this president built up the most beautiful economy in 3.5 years. The Chinese Communist Party crippled that in 30 days. He is going to rebuild this economy based on 3 things: buy American, deregulate, and innovate. We're going to start by bringing home the pharmaceutical and medical supplies supply chains here, using things like the DPA, but also other private sector enterprises. And I think this week was really important. I saw this as a turning point because we not only introduced a strategic national stockpile in President Trump's image, smarter, bigger, more resilient. We also announced a vaccine race that is moving in Trump time, which is to say as fast as possible. And we're getting things done in terms of reopening the economy. So that's where this Trump ship is heading. It's jobs. It's buy American, it's make stuff here. And for every service sector job we may lose in this transition, we're going to replace those by manufacturing, and things are going to be great.
I want to go back, though, to the issue of testing and test kits. You're making a lot of promises here. At what point will every business leader in America know they have access to as many test kits as they need to reopen their facilities?
Admiral Girard has said it quite clearly that everybody who needs a test now can get a test. We continue to ramp up.
When do we get
production.
beyond that?
I'm not here to make promises to you, Chuck. I'm here to tell you, as the coordinator of the supply chains, that we are rapidly ramping up testing, just like we did with ventilators. We're ramping up surgical gowns. We're ramping up masks. And this strategic national stockpile 2.0, I think it might be worth talking just a little bit about. It's smarter because we're using information technology. It's bigger in a really smart way, because not only are we going to fill FEMA warehouses with a lot more PPE and medicines, we're also going to use distribution centers like Owens and Minor, which the president visited last week in Pennsylvania, to have them hold additional inventory. Hospitals' point of care are going to hold additional inventories. And most important, Chuck, in terms of this, Buy American, Build American. As we locate the domestic supply chain here, our factories are going to be able to hold reserve capacity, which allows us to surge to additional demand. So my job is to make sure people of America have enough of what they need going forward, and I'm confident that we are moving beautifully in that direction under the leadership of President Trump.
Look, I know you want to talk about the strategic national stockpile, but I got to ask you this question. You did a pandemic exercise, and you went through these plans in 18 and 19. Do you have a good explanation for why the after-action reports weren't followed in time to have our stockpiles prepared for this pandemic?
I'm not looking in the rearview mirror right now, Chuck. And this president's just looking straight ahead towards what's going to be a really strong future. The fact of the matter is that we were able to get through the Chinese winter here, the pandemic, with what we had. It was a threadbare FEMA stockpile that was left to us by the previous administration. The one that we're going to have going into the fall is not that. It's going to be, as I said, smarter, bigger, far more resilient. That's what I'm doing, Chuck. My focus here, I came here to kind of work on trade policy issues, and somehow I became part quartermaster and supply clerk. But it's been a beautiful thing working with private industry to see how innovative the companies of America can be, and how the manufacturing platforms of this country, if we just give them some lift, how they can really develop, like the GM example I told you about earlier.
I want to ask you quickly about the CDC and ask you whether the president has confidence in the CDC. It does seem as if the initial guidelines, they didn't want them put out. They've put down very limited guidelines with more detailed ones coming later. CDC hasn't been able to give a briefing now in over a month. Does the president have confidence in the CDC as our lead on this pandemic?
Well, I'd say two things about that. First of all, you should ask the president that question, not me. But early on in this crisis, the CDC, which really had the most trusted brand around the world in this space, really let the country down with the testing, because not only did they keep the testing within the bureaucracy, they had a bad test, and that did set us back. But going forward with these guidelines, the important thing to understand here for the American people is this. Opening up this economy is not a question of lives versus jobs. The fact of the matter is, and what President Trump realized early on, is that if you lock people down, you may save lives directly from the China virus. But you indirectly are going to kill a lot more people. And why do I say that? We know statistically, based on our experience with the China trade shock in the 2000s, that unemployment creates more suicides, depression, and drug abuse. But we also know this in this crisis, as we've basically locked down our hospitals for everything but COVID. Women haven't been getting mammograms or cervical examinations for cancer. We haven't been able to do other procedures for the heart or the kidneys, and that's going to kill people as well. So if you contrast like this complete lockdown, where some of the people in the medical community want to just run and hide until the virus is extinguished, that's going to not only take a huge toll on the American economy, it's going to kill many more people than the China virus ever would.
I gotta ask you this question about the president. On one hand, he says he wants to leave these decisions up to governors. But it does seem as if he doesn't like the decision of a governor, particularly if they're in the Midwest, he expresses his view. How does that help the governor be able to make their own decisions?
Look, I report directly to the president. I'm one of the top 5 advisors on policy. I let the president speak for himself. That's all I can say. I do think that what we're seeing here across this country in terms of different responses, that it is very useful to leverage local control. But on the other hand, I'm a Californian, and when I see the mayor of Los Angeles want to lock down that city through the end of July, I just got to have to scratch my head. I think that California, that's the only way I see California ever becoming a red state, because my folks back in Orange County are not going to put up with that kind of nonsense. And it is nonsense.
Peter Navarro, the Defense Production Coordinator, an advisor on trade and manufacturing policy as well. Thanks for coming on and sharing the administration's views. I appreciate it.
Great to talk with you today, sir.